Welcome to Rock Your Block. I am your host and producer, Tia Young. Our special guest has just written her very first book entitled Red Dirt, Blue Blood, The Story of the Nances of Lower Alabama. She has spent nearly 20 years telling stories of other people and places as a former newspaper reporter. Our guest now turns her focus to the story of her ancestors. She weaves a decade of genealogical research with historical context to illustrate the makings of an extraordinary legacy. Our special guest is a graduate of Florida A&M University. She also holds a master's degree in strategic communication from American University. She's a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Inc. Please welcome Miss Rakia Nance to the Rock Your Block set. Rakia, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And I can't wait to get into your story. The book was wonderful.
Thank you.
I did get a chance to read it all, and I mean, it was just very compelling.
Thank you.
So thank you. What inspired you to write your book?
I've been fascinated by my family history since the time I was a little girl. Visiting my grandmother and my great aunts and uncles and listening to my dad and my uncle and my aunts and cousins talk about the way they grew up, and hearing these little tidbits as a child, I was always fascinated by that. And as I grew older, I started a blog to kind of capture some of these things. I think that I come from a family of storytellers, so I think it's in the blood for me to write these things down. And as I continued with the blog, people said, "Oh, one day you should write a book." And one day eventually crept up on me, so I put pen to paper and decided that I wanted to write this book and not just have it be a blog. I wanted to really capture and document this story because what I found too, a lot of these stories, they were passed down and they lived in the memories and the minds of my elders. And as they passed on, there wasn't anyone to continue to document that. So I wanted there to be something physical and something lasting to capture all of these things.
Right. Well, how long have you been researching your family history? You say as a child, so were you like 6 or 7 listening to the stories, or were you a little older?
As a little girl, yes, I was listening. Maybe that counts as research, but I'd say the formal part of my research I've been doing for a little over a decade now. I remembered all of these stories and things that I had heard, and then as I got older, and I drew upon a lot of my journalism training too, to understand what documents to look for and what information that could contain. And so I coupled that formal research with the anecdotal stories that I had heard, and I was able to put that together and really take my research forward. And as I mentioned, that's been going on for over 10 years now, and I'm still continuing my research.
That's wonderful. I was thinking, what would inspire you, not to give up, because you're talking at least 10 years, maybe even a little bit more. So what kept you going with that? Because you're going from childhood to teenage to high school, college, working, as a professional. So what kept you going?
Really the story. It felt like each little tidbit I found out, I would want to find out a little bit more. And sometimes I look at my family tree as this collection of characters, and I'd find out a little bit more about one character, and I'd want to know more about, well, how did that happen, or how did that come to be, or how did this person end up living there, or this person lived 90-something years, what was their life like? So I think the more I uncovered, the more I wanted to uncover, so that kept me going.
When I think of a research process to do what you have done and to come up with a book, it's like, what was that like? What is a research process really like?
It can be tedious. You do have to be very organized. Like I said, I had a good foundation to go on with all of these stories and oral history that had been passed down. but I also had to write it down and go back and confirm that I remembered what I heard correctly, and ask people, well, did you see this, or how old were you when this happened, and try to put all these contextual clues together to really shape that larger story. And then when you talk about looking at records such as a census record or a vital record like a marriage certificate or a death certificate or court documents, you have to know, one, what document it is that you're looking for, two, where to find it, and three, what kind of information that document will tell you and how it will help your research and where it fits in. I was able to find out a lot about the life of my great-great-grandfather, Henry Nance, who was enslaved. And one of the most difficult things to research is an ancestor who is enslaved, because the records can be very scant or scarce. So again, there, that was, or non-existent.
Non-existent.
So again, there, you have to know what type of documents exist, and where they're housed and how you might be able to identify them.
In the areas that you were working in, Alabama, the parts of Alabama, or did you have to go to other states as well?
Most of the research I did that had to do with the Alabama records, I was living in Alabama at the time, so it made it a little bit easier to go and request those records or have them sent to me. My great-great-grandfather, Henry Nance, was born in Tennessee, so there was a portion of my research that was dependent on Tennessee records. And the Tennessee State Library and Archives is a wonderful resource, and they have a lot of records available online, and they have an excellent research staff who is eager to help with all sorts of research, and very, very happy to send either emailed copies, scanned documents, or photocopies sent in the mail. This is another part of my ongoing research. I do want to eventually visit Tennessee and Nashville, Davidson County in particular, so I can extend my research and delve deeper, because I know there's nothing like being there. There's nothing like being in the area where your ancestors once lived.
Right. When you started your research, who was the first person, and give their age, that you felt the need to talk to first about it within the family?
A lot of my family history I learned from my grandfather's siblings.
Okay.
My grandfather died before I was born, so I was able to learn a lot about him and his life, not just from my dad and my grandmother and my aunt and uncle, but from his siblings as well.
Oh, okay.
So as I was growing up, I would hear these stories from his surviving siblings. And my family, we are blessed with the gift of longevity. Yes. My grandfather's siblings, some of them lived into their 90s. So I was able to sit and talk and converse and share and laugh and confirm and ask all sorts of questions well into adulthood. And they were always so eager and happy to share.
And they had the memory.
They did.
That was a blessing there,
Yes.
just for them to remember.
Yes.
The details.
Yes.
Right. So how did you record, just writing, or did you have a recorder, a tape recorder? How was that?
I wrote down, I took physical notes. I also had a tape recorder, we took video, we had all sorts of backup methods of documenting what we were told. And although I was the one who wrote the book, I believe that our family history is a shared history.
Yes.
It lives in all of us.
Right.
So my cousins and I were constantly sharing anecdotes and stories and comparing, things that we might have heard and putting it together. And even at reunions, that's kind of where the gold mine of information is, and that's, to me, really where things become solidified and enshrined, if you will, at these gatherings, because sometimes you have one family member who will talk about something and then that jogs the memory of another. So you're getting this very full picture of what the family history is.
Right. What was the most difficult part of your research? And tell me if it was painful, some of the parts of it, or you were just able to plow right through?
Difficult. I would say it was sobering once I was able to identify who Henry Nance's enslaver was. And that document also, it was the court order that showed the sale of slaves. And knowing approximately when Henry Nance was born and when he died, I figured out that he couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old when he was sold. So that means that he was sold away from his family, away from his parents.
Yeah.
Likely never saw them again. So that was very sobering. You hear about the evils and the horrors of slavery, but I'm convinced that it is much worse than we can ever imagine.
Right.
Even the things that are documented, as terrible as they are, I don't think it scrapes the surface of how atrocious those horrors really were.
Yes.
So that was very sobering to see that in black and white, to see the sale of human beings, and knowing that that would have an influence and impact on the rest of his life.
So you're looking at original documents that go so many years back. Were they almost where you couldn't read them, or do they have them in some type of special paper or something?
The documents that I received, that particular document, that was a photocopy.
Okay.
And again, it was provided by the Tennessee State Library and Archives. And it was legible.
It was legible.
It was. I have come across some documents that are quite faded and very difficult to read. Sometimes ancestry sites or genealogy sites, they have transcription services which are helpful but not all the time accurate. So it does take a little bit of detective work and sleuthing sometimes to put things together. Sometimes things may be mistranscribed, or the spelling may be off. So you have to give a little leeway when you're interpreting the information that you find.
Were there any surprising factors or situations that you ran into?
Surprising. When I was looking at this document, the court-ordered slave sale, I didn't know what to expect, but what I discovered was that Henry Nance's enslaver, all of the people he enslaved were sold within his family. They were either sold to his sons or his sons-in-law, which was, I don't know, I don't want to say it was surprising. I really didn't know what to expect.
Was it a large number?
It was 13 people that he had enslaved that were listed in that court-ordered sale, but I'd come across some other documents that showed other people that he had sold prior to his death. And it turned out that he was selling these people to neighbors and business associates, because as I was looking through the documents, I would see some of these names repeat over and over again.
So some things could maybe have not even been recorded.
Correct.
Or reported on
Correct.
that end. How were you able to actually identify your great-great-grandfather's enslaver?
So I knew from our family history that our last name, Nance, was in fact the enslaver's name. And I knew that Henry Nance was born in Nashville, Tennessee, which is Davidson County. So I knew that I had an enslaver last name and a location. So I began looking for a slave census or slave records having to do with white people whose last name was Nance. And it kept coming back to this one particular family. And I narrowed it down to 3 people. And for a while, I was stuck on that. I couldn't find anything that could determine exactly which person in this particular Nance family had enslaved Henry Nance. And then it was suggested that I look back through old newspaper records.
Okay.
And I came across a newspaper ad that was announcing an estate sale for William Howe Nance. And it said men, women, and boys and girls, Negroes from the sale of this estate.
Wow.
And then I noticed that it said it was a court-ordered sale. So I figured, well, maybe the actual court record exists.
Right.
So I requested that from the Tennessee State Library and Archives, and as it turned out, they did have that. I described exactly what the record was I was looking for, the date, who the estate belonged to, who the witnesses were, as much detail as I could to give to the researchers at the archives in hopes that they could find that. And they did. They emailed me a PDF copy of that court-ordered sale, and there I saw all these names listed.
Right, right. Well, have you, I'm really curious to know this, have you been able to have any contact or correspondence from any of the enslavers' descendants?
Yes, I was. That was.
Tell us about that. That's interesting.
That was part of my research. If you are descended from an enslaved person, that's a necessary step because so much of your history is intertwined with that of the family of the enslaver. And you find genealogy is a popular hobby.
Yeah.
So you find a lot of websites or web pages or even on ancestry.com where people have documented and uploaded their family trees. And I saw a site that was dedicated to Nance family history. So being the curious researcher I am, I decided to email the webmaster of one of these sites, and I introduced myself and explained what I was looking for and how his research might be able to help mine and vice versa. And as it turned out, he was a descendant of William Howe Nance. And he said that he had known that he was descended from an enslaver and had always been curious about what happened to the descendants of the people that his ancestor had enslaved.
So he was helpful? Would you say
he was very helpful.
Was very
he was very
That's
helpful.
Good. That's good to know. Talk a little bit about the Nance family and the legacy in Alabama.
It goes back hundreds of years. Henry Nance left Tennessee for Alabama, which is another portion of my research that I'm still exploring, the why and how and when, and ended up in Coffee County, Alabama. And that is where the Nance legacy really begins to bloom. My great-grandmother, Mamie Gilly Nance, her family was one of the earliest Black families in Coffee County, Alabama. They had a hand in developing Coffee County Training School, which was the school for Black children there. That school educated hundreds of Black students throughout the 20th century. And when that school burned down in 1938, my great-grandparents provided the land so that it could be rebuilt.
You said burned down? Wow.
Yes.
How did that happen? Do you know? Or any?
I did. I looked up, that was another story that my grandfather's siblings told me.
It's another book, perhaps.
And I was curious too how the school burned down, because you hear so much about resistance to Black education or Black progress, Black people existing in general in the South in those days. And according to the newspaper article, it was an electrical fire.
Oh, okay.
Again, that was what the newspaper said. That was the explanation, the official explanation that I was able to come across. So my great-grandparents were able to provide the land to rebuild the school. My grandfather's siblings, in particular my Aunt Myra Nance Riley, she began her career at Coffee County Training School, was a longtime educator in Enterprise, Alabama. All of my grandfather's sisters were educators in Coffee County, Alabama. My grandfather, Y.C. Nance, he was a county extension service agent in Bullock County, Alabama, and was working with Black farmers side by side, teaching them farming techniques. And in addition to that, he was also responsible for bringing organized sports to Black children in Bullock County.
And this, what year? This
was in the 1950s and 1960s. One of my grandfather's brothers, Saveus Nance Sr., he was a graduate of Tuskegee Institute, and he went on to establish the vocational education program in Colbert County, Alabama. And fast forward to modern day, one of my cousins, she was the first Black woman elected to the Enterprise City Council in Alabama, and she represents the same area where our ancestors have lived for so long. I have another cousin who is the mayor of Union Springs, Alabama, and my dad was a legendary sports writer who covered the SWAC, and he brought a lot of prominence and attention to this historically Black conference that hadn't received really the recognition that it was due. He really thrust the conference onto a national stage.
Right. What a legacy that is, and there's more. I know there's more. We're limited by time, but I want you to share with us, what is your hope that the readers will gain from reading your book, Red Dirt, Blue Blood, the story of the Nances of Lower Alabama?
One, I hope that readers are inspired to take their own genealogical journey. And I hope that this story really lets people know I hope that it presents a different narrative of the popular one. We were slaves and then we were free, and that's it. There was so much that happened in between. And I think this story is really one of self-determination. One of the things that really inspires me and just leaves me in awe about Henry Nance is that here he was, a formerly enslaved, illiterate man who went on to become self-sustaining. He was the only Black landowner in his community in 1900, which is a feat within itself. He was able to maintain that land and hold on to it for several years until eminent domain came in, where that area now, Hall Ridge, Alabama, is present-day Fort Rucker, Alabama.
That's a
military base, yes.
Right.
Yes.
That's good. Well, we are just about out of time. I want to thank you so much for sharing your book with us and for coming on the show.
Thank you.
I was really impressed with the entire book, but the pages from 106 to 114 were especially touched my heart because you actually give a blueprint.
Yes.
You give a blueprint for those of us who don't know where to get started.
Right.
Can you just talk? We've got about 3 minutes left, and I need at least one of those minutes.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about your heart feeling about why you inserted that in your book?
Again, I really wanted people to be inspired to begin their own genealogical journey. It's not easy by any means, and sometimes you don't know where to start. So I figured if I can help somebody even get on the road to doing that, then I should. Yes. It takes a lot of persistence. It takes a lot of patience, but it can be done. And I think it's one of the most rewarding things that I've done. I think that everybody should know where they come from and what their roots are. Right. I think it's an invaluable gift, and if I can help provide that, then I think that I can call myself a success.
Yes. Well, again, Rakia, thank you so much for coming. And listen, I loved the book. I really did.
Thank you.
And you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you for watching Rock Your Block with our special guest, Rakia Nance, author of her new book, Red Dirt, Blue Blood, the story of the Nances of Lower Alabama. I am Tia Young, signing off for Rock Your Block, and we will see you next week for another great show. Bye-bye.